Well, we've been talking about this for the last several weeks, but we live in a bit of a ruled world. Thank you. And it doesn't take much, experience out there to experience some of the rudeness that we see. And sometimes it's major stuff, and sometimes it's minor stuff. Sometimes it's like somebody cutting in line or taking your place in the gas station line. That's the worst, isn't it? Or, somebody's talking too loudly, or somebody's being mean. That's a little more serious. Somebody being dismissive or ungrateful, and we see a lot of people just like you do for them, and they never seem to even acknowledge it. It's like it's expected, and like they have it coming. We also see some of the things that maybe feel a little harsher, like the name calling that we see, or some of the trolling that goes on online now, or even like the ghosting has become a big term. And they're all things where people just aren't being polite or courteous. They're actually being rude. And it seems like it's getting worse. And I don't know if it's actually getting worse. I think sometimes we're just maybe more aware of it. Maybe it's more visible, or maybe it's more pronounced. Or maybe it's more expected, and since it's just how people are, it's just like accepted. Like, you know what, that might have bothered me before, it's just how people are, I'm not going to let it bother me. And we've kind of just become a world that's a little bit harsh and difficult, and I don't know if angry is the right word, but we're just not very kind or gentle with each other, and we certainly don't have very good manners. Now, the scary part to me, though, is not that the world has bad manners. The scary part to me is the fact that sometimes I'm the one that has bad manners. And I don't really ever in my life try to deliberately be rude. I don't get up in the morning and say, you know what, I'm going to see how many people I can tick off, or how ungrateful I can be, or if I can be offensive or really get in people's grill. And I don't do that. And yet, there are days where I think I'm rude just in how I've interacted with people, and it's not so much intentional as it's unintentional. Or sometimes I'm just not totally tuned into what's going on there. And so sometimes I think we struggle with this idea of rudeness ourselves, not because we're trying to be difficult people, but because we're just not very aware of how we're interacting with people, or how we're actually coming across. Now, sometimes we fall prey to this, where I've discovered that if I can be a little bit rude or a little bit ornery, a little bit more difficult, I can kind of get what I want. But that's not really the typical thing that we do. It's more that we just kind of are clued out and tuned out, and in the process, we add to the we add to the problem, and we need to do better ourselves. Now, I don't think we're going to change the world as far as how rude it is. But I'm not sure that's the goal. I think the goal is that we bring to the world our courtesy, our politeness, and our good manners. And as God's people, I think that's part of being a light in the world. And as the church, I think that's one of our roles too, is that we should be bringing light to the world. But as a church then, this is a great laboratory for how we treat people. So as a church, when we talk about church manners, we should have great manners in church. And the way that we treat people here is great practice for how we go out into our world and treat the people that we come into contact with. So this should be a place of grace and kindness and gentleness and respect and decency and orderliness. And I hope that's true, and I hope that's what you experience when you come here to Waterford Community Church, that when I walk in the doors here, I know I'm going to be treated kindly. I know I'm going to be treated respectfully. And as we go about our business as a church, that's how we interact with each other too, that we are people who have good manners. But if we're going to have good manners, whether it's in church or whether it's in society, whether it's in our workplaces, in our homes, in our schools, if we're going to have good manners, we need to change our thinking a little bit in regards to them. Now, what seems to us when I say we need to change our thinking about manners is like, well, I need to think that they're important. And yes, but most of us probably already think that they're important. Or maybe we need to think that that's something I need to work on. And to be honest, probably all of us could work on our manners a little bit. But what I'm really talking about here is we need to change the way that we think, because the way that we think actually causes us to act a certain way or to act either politely, courteously with good manners or to act rudely with bad manners. And so that's where I want to go this morning. I want to explore that idea of, like, how do we need to be thinking? Because the way that we're thinking is going to show up in how we treat and interact with other people. And to do that, we're going to look at the story this morning of Mary. And so I want to encourage you to we're going to start in Luke chapter 2. We're going to be back and forth between Luke 1 and 2 this morning, but Luke chapter 2. And we're going to look at this story of Mary and see what we can learn from her about manners, as we've done with all the other people. So as you're turning there, let me just do a really quick review this morning. We started with Joseph, and we talked about his manners, where he didn't want to disgrace Mary, but wanted to be very kind and compassionate and gracious in how he dealt with her when he found out that she was pregnant. But it said that because he was a righteous person. And so the point was that Joseph was treating Mary properly because of who Joseph was, not because of what Mary had done. And good manners is always about who I am, not what's happened to me or what somebody else has done or what's going on around me. It always starts with me, and I can show good manners to anybody regardless. And Joseph gives us a great example there. It's also a reminder to us, Joseph is a reminder to us, that our manners actually are a reflection on who we are as people. And when our manners are bad, people are going to look at us and go, oh, what's going on there? Something's not right. And so it's just an encouragement to us as far as manners go, that it starts with us. Elizabeth we looked at, and Elizabeth really taught us that manners are about understanding the feelings of others. And we see here in her interaction with Mary how she seems to feel with Mary, invites her in and gives her a safe place. And we talked about that idea of empathy and how we can be conscious of what people are feeling and experiencing and invite them into our own lives safely. Last week we looked at the shepherds, went a little different direction with them, but we specifically talked about the manners that they displayed in receiving a gift. And sometimes how hard it is to receive well. You know, we think of the obvious as saying thank you, but it also goes beyond that. But then we get to Mary this week, and so we look at her from manners, and maybe of all these characters, we observe less of anything that she does, but we observe maybe more of what's going on inside her when this story happens. So I'm going to look at Luke chapter 2, verse number 19. This is a verse that we read last week when we talked about the shepherds, and it's tucked into a weird place. And maybe as we were reading it, even last week, you're like, that's an odd verse, especially right there. And I think it is, but by the time we're done this morning, I think we'll have a better reason of why it's there. But let me start reading in verse number 16, actually. And it says, so they, or the shepherds, hurried off, and they found Mary and Joseph and the baby, who was lying in a manger. When they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what they had been told about this child. And all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. So we've been talking about the shepherds. And then we get to verse number 19. But Mary, she treasured these things up, or stored them up, or kept track of all these things, and pondered them in her heart. Or that could also be translated, she mulled them over in her mind. And so Mary's in this scene, the shepherds come, and Mary's taking this all in, and it's like she's mentally processing this. But I don't think it was just talking about the shepherds. I think it was like everything that had been happening in her story, she's taking it in, and she's mentally processing it. And then it tells us in verse number 20, we go back to the shepherds. They returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things that they had heard and seen, which was what they had been told. And so I'm going to come back to that verse in just a little bit. But I want to ask that question, what was Mary thinking? What was Mary thinking? And we get that idea a little bit from that verse, but we're going to get a broader idea as we look through this story a little bit more. What was she thinking? Because I think if we can get a handle on what she's thinking, it will help us when it comes to this idea of how we should be thinking, because it affects how we treat others or how we demonstrate good manners. So we're going to be looking at 4 things as far as how Mary was thinking that will help us, I think, when it comes to manners. But before I do that, I want to look at another verse. And this time I'm going to go back to Luke chapter 1. So you can flip back a page or a screen. Luke chapter 1. This is a really interesting verse to me, or verses actually. Luke chapter 1, I'm going to start reading in verse number 1. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been filled among us. And so this is Luke, the author, speaking here. And he is saying there are several people who have sat down and tried to write out the Jesus story here. Now, at this point, probably only two of them has succeeded, or at least only two of them has succeeded that we have a copy of, and that would be Matthew and Mark. John actually wrote an account too, but his account came a little bit later on. So Matthew and Mark have tried and written this account, but he's saying, you know what? People have tried to give us an account, but I'm going to add my name to the list. I'm going to do the same thing. So I've written a book here to detail and outline the life of Christ. But he goes on there, he says, just as they were handed down to us, these accounts were handed down to us by those who were from the first eyewitnesses and servants of the word. So this was really easy for Matthew to write a book because he was a disciple. He followed Jesus, and so he could just kind of write from his firsthand experience. Mark was not a disciple of Christ, but we believe that Mark and Peter probably, in a sense, co-authored the book, that it was really Peter's account of the gospel, and Mark was just kind of the pen that wrote that down. So another, up-close information, Peter giving the information. John writes later on, but again, John is an eyewitness. When you get to Luke, he's working at a disadvantage. First of all, he probably wasn't there when all of this stuff was going on. He was a Gentile, so he was a foreigner, probably didn't live in Israel at this time. And so he comes to the scene later, he comes to the story later, and he's trying to tell the story, but he doesn't have all the first-hand information. So how did he get it? Well, I think he gives us a hint here in how he gets it. It's this idea of going back to the original sources, going to the people who lived it, who experienced it, and my guess is he interviewed them. There wasn't a written record to go back. It wasn't like he could, go to the library and pull out reference books on it or go online and find out. He had to go to the people who actually lived it and experienced, and I think sat down and said, hey, tell me about it. And so I think as you go through the book of Luke, what you're getting is a lot of people actually contributing to the stories. Obviously, he's drawing from Mark and Matthew, and we see some repetitive things in there, but there's a lot where he's saying, hey, or where he's saying things that he's gotten from other people. So, why is that important to what we're talking about here this morning? Well, he wasn't at Jesus' birth. In fact, nobody was at Jesus' birth save some shepherds and Mary and Joseph. So when Luke writes this, we believe that he's simply writing down the story that Mary gave him. And almost you could do this, this is really Mary's. He could have actually put it like in first term, and almost done it this way. And when I talked to Mary, Mary told me the story, and this is what she said. So as you read the Christmas story in Luke chapter 2, and it's really the one that we have the most detail of. Mark doesn't talk about it. Matthew talks about Joseph and the wise men. John goes off in an entirely different direction. But when you read the story of the Christmas story in Luke, you're reading Mary's account of this story, which to me is kind of cool when you look at that. Like Mary, this is what she told you about. Mary, remember that verse where we said, and she pondered all these things in her heart? This would have been decades later when Luke is interviewing Mary, but she's sharing this story that I think was so etched in her mind that she can recount that. So, some scholars actually think that Mary may have been a primary source, not just of Luke 1 and 2, but through the entire book. If you go through the book of Luke, supposedly, and I did not go back and double check this, so I was reading somebody else's work, but there's 9 mentions of widows in the book of Luke, which is fascinating because we believe that Mary was widowed. After you get past Luke chapter 2, we never see Joseph mentioned again in the scriptures. And so we think that she was actually a widow. There's over 250 references to women in Luke's gospel. In fact, Luke has all kinds of stories that are unique to his gospel that are from about women or telling us, the roles that women played in the story. Which in Luke is almost like, he writes the gospel, but it's like the gospel for women. And so we can read this morning as if she's telling us the story. And at the same time, I think it's significant that it's in third person because she's not the center of the story, and she's not trying to be the center of the story, and yet we're gonna really focus on her this morning. And so when we look at Luke 2:19, we get a picture of Mary taking all of this story in. When the angel came to visit her, when she went to visit Elizabeth, when she ended up in a stable in Bethlehem, when the shepherds, she's taking all of those things in, and she's processing them in her mind. So let's read the story. I'm going to read in Luke chapter 1, verse number 26. And I'm going to read this, actually, if Mary's writing it. So in the 6 months of Elizabeth's pregnancy, God sent the angel Gabriel to Nazareth, a town in Galilee, to a virgin pledged to be married to a man named Joseph, a descendant of David. That virgin's name was Mary. That's me. The angel came to me and said, "Greetings, you who are highly favored." And notice that phrase right there, "you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." Mary, that's me. I was greatly troubled at his words, and I wondered what kind of greeting this might be. But the angel said to me, "Do not be afraid, Mary. You have found favor with God. You will conceive and give birth to a son, and you're to call his name Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end." "How will this be?" I asked. "I'm a virgin." And the angel said, "The Holy Spirit will come on you. The power of the Most High will overshadow you. You will be the Holy One." So the Holy One will be born, will be called the Son of God. Even Elizabeth, your relative, is going to have a child in her old age. And she who was said to be unable to conceive is in her 6th month, for no word from God will ever fail. So I said, "I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled." And then the angel left her. And so we start getting a picture into Mary's mind by looking at that phrase there where the angel said to her, "You have found favor." In fact, we see that twice. You have found favor in what the angel repeats that. But I think this is really important as we look at the story of Mary. Because when the angel comes and says, "You have found favor," we might say it this way today: you have found grace. But the idea of grace is that God gives us a special blessing beyond what we should expect. But that's not exactly it either. It's that God gives us a special blessing beyond what we deserve. And so favor goes this way, but our deservedness goes this way. And so when the angel comes, and Mary's repeating this twice now, back to Luke, she said, "I was told that I was highly favored. I was told that I was receiving this great privilege, this great blessing, even though I know I was completely undeserving and actually deserving of the opposite." And we get a picture into her mind, and it's this: she had a very accurate view of herself. It wasn't like the angel came to you and said, Mary said, you're going to have the Messiah. And she's like, "Well, I must be special. Like, why would God pick me unless, I've got it going on?" I mean, maybe he was really impressed by all those verses I learned in Sunday school or whatever. But it's not that at all. In fact, we see that phrase where we ended reading there where she says, "I am the Lord's servant." You know what? I'm just a servant. I'm nobody special. I'm not impressive. In fact, we can go on and you read into the next verses there. Mary has a prayer that she makes. But look what it says there in verse number 46. And Mary said, "My soul glorifies the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God my Savior, for he has been mindful of the humble state of his servant." And she wasn't talking about her great humble spirit there. She was talking about the fact that she was probably just a poor peasant girl. I don't know. She was nobody impressive. She was nobody that would have gotten a lot of attention on the streets. And yet she was saying, "You know what? This is who I am, and I am okay with this." She had an accurate view of herself. And I think this is really helpful to us when we talk about manners. And sometimes when we're rude, it's because we think too much of ourselves. Or you could say it's because we think of ourselves too much. But we struggle with our manners because we're way too much into ourselves and what we think we have coming, what we think we deserve, what we think we're entitled to. And when you see Mary, she's like, "Wow, okay." And there's never any instance there where she becomes proud or about herself. I have a friend, Andy Theory, who actually was my Bible teacher when I was in high school. But he ended up doing missions work in Guatemala and Nicaragua. But anytime you met Andy, you know how you'd say that, "Hey, Andy, how you doing?" He would always say the same thing: "Better than I deserve." Well, that's really the truth, isn't it? And all of us are doing better than what we deserve. We all have so much, and we all have so many privileges. And I realize we have hard things, and we go through difficult things in life, and we have disappointments, and sometimes it doesn't work out. But if we're completely honest, it's going pretty well. And we would do ourselves a favor if we would actually learn to have an accurate view of ourselves. Not that we think badly of ourselves, that we just think less of ourselves, or don't think too much of ourselves, or don't think we're so important. But a lot of times when we're rude, it's because we get to that place, don't we? Well, I deserve this, or I have this coming, or I haven't been treated the way that I think I should be, or somebody hasn't helped me like they should be, and so nobody's waiting on me here. And bad manners become that result of that inflated view of ourselves or our own importance. And I become too much about my opinions, or my rights, or my expectations, or my importance, or my rightness. And you know what? You have violated all those things. Well, then that gives me permission to treat you differently. Well, no, it doesn't. Because all those things shouldn't be that big a deal to start with. I shouldn't be all about my opinions, or about my rights, or all about my expectations, or my importance, or my rightness. Sometimes we struggle with it because we've convinced ourselves that we have certain privileges that should be ours, that I need to get what is mine, that others, in this situation, it's your job to take care of me and to serve me here, just depending on my position or my rank or whatever like that. Well, that's not right either. Or sometimes I view others as a means to get what I want, and boy, do we see this in our world, right? So I might want your approval, I might need your assistance, whatever like that, and so I'm going to use my manners or my lack of them to manipulate the situations so that you're kind of forced to do what I want you to do, and it becomes a power play. But it all leads up to this rudeness. There was a quote that was in What's Up this past week that I love, and it was this, by some guy named Eric Hoffer. I don't know who he is, but he wrote this. He said, "Rudeness is a weak man's imitation of strength." It's pretty strong, isn't it? But when I'm okay with who I am, and when I have an accurate view of who I am, then I can treat other people better, and rudeness isn't likely to happen. When rudeness happens, I'm simply looking out for number one, right? So the real truth is humility is really requisite if we're going to show good manners. Well, let's go back and look at verse number 38 again. We just read it, but let me read it again. "I am the Lord's servant," Mary answered. "May your word to me be fulfilled." And the angel left her. What is she saying in that verse? And this leads us to our second thing that we learn about her thinking. Well, there's two possibilities here. She might be saying, when he says, "May it be to me as you said," yes, I get to be the Messiah's mother. Please let this happen like you said it would happen. Keep your promise, please. It may have been that. Or it may have been, "Oh, wow, I wasn't expecting that, and oh gosh, I'm going to be pregnant, and everybody's going to be asking questions about that. Oh, and I've never been a mother before. Wait a minute, I have to raise God's son, and whoa, I'm not sure I would have picked." Maybe it was a little bit like, this is daunting, overwhelming, and maybe both were true. But what is her response? Her response is like, okay, may it be to me as you said. May it play out as it plays out. I'm okay with it. I'm good with it. And the point is this, is that she willingly accepted what life, or you could say what God brought her way. Okay, maybe this isn't what I would have picked, and maybe it was. I don't know, but it's like, I'm okay. As it happens, I'm okay with how it happens. We often talk about our choices in life and how we have them. And boy, we have a lot of choices in life. But there are a lot of things we don't choose in life. We don't choose our parents. We don't necessarily choose our kids. We don't choose the circumstances that happen. We don't choose the losses that we have in life, the disappointments in life. We don't necessarily get to choose very much where we live. And things happen, like friends move away, or kids get sick, or somebody else gets the promotion, or the furnace quits. Well, if we're way too much about, things have to be the way that we want them to be, then we're going to push and we're going to fight and we're going to scheme and do whatever we have to do to manipulate circumstances to be a certain way. And what goes in the process is our courtesy, our politeness, our manners. And what happens, rudeness happens when we feel like we have to fight for what is ours, or when we have to fight for what we deserve. Some of us, if we were Mary, it would have played out like this. Joseph shows up and says, well, Mary, there's no room in the inn, and on all I've been able to find is the stable. And we would be like, well, this mama ain't giving birth in a stable. Because we're too much about, having to have things our way. And I'm not just talking about, passivity here, like where Mary is just like, oh, whatever, and let people run all over top of her. In fact, Mary was a pretty spunky person, I think. Think about this. She had at least 4 more kids after Jesus, maybe more. She might have had some education. When you read that prayer in Luke chapter 1, there's like 10 different references to the Old Testament in her prayer. She might have been pretty well educated. At some point, she lost her husband. She was a widow. Maybe she was still trying to raise kids while she was a widow. I don't know. She somehow overcomes that whole out-of-wedlock stigma that she had in her society, which would have been pretty harsh. And she becomes a significant member of society. She has social standing. She gets invited to a wedding. At that wedding, she's the one who prompts Jesus into his first miracle. She shows up one time questioning Jesus, and she was really out of bounds, but she shows a lot of spunk and energy there. She's the one who hangs in for the whole crucifixion experience to the bitter end. And can you imagine how horrible that was? This is a tough woman. No doubt about that. She's also the one that's there in the upper room at Pentecost. She was actually probably one of the preachers that went out there and shared, in the languages to all the people who were in Jerusalem. So when you look at Mary, it's not like she was just this person who just let everybody roll over top of her. No, it was this attitude. It's like, you know what? I'm okay with what's going on here. I'm okay with what God brings into my life. And we need that attitude too, because when we get that attitude, then we don't have to fight anymore. We can put down our gloves and our striving, and we can be okay with what is. And we don't have to live frustrated, and we don't have to live worried about what everybody else is doing. Instead, we can get out of ourselves, and we can start worrying about the people around us. We go to the third point here. And this is the verse that we started with. But Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. What's the point here? She's taking it all in. She's taking it in from the angel visit to going to see Elizabeth, to the shepherds. But I think what she has here is she has an awareness of what is going on around her. And I think this is where a lot of us fail in this courtesy or manners category. We don't really mean to be rude. We're just not really aware of what's going on around us. We're so focused on ourselves and our situation, our own little world. It's not that we're being selfish. We're just kind of being self-absorbed. And so we don't even notice things that are happening around us. And one of the things I love about Mary here is she's just taking this all in. We have experienced that. You've been in the grocery store, right, where 2 people are talking in the aisle, and it's caused gridlock in the whole store. They're not really trying to be difficult, do you think? They're just not aware. Or maybe you've been guilty of this stuff. Like you don't think things through, and you went through the dessert line, and there were 2, so you took them both, and somebody didn't get one. You weren't really trying to make sure that they were, practicing good health, and not eating too much. You're just not paying attention to what's going on there. Not realizing when you're in the coffee shop and you're on the phone and you're loud and everybody can hear your conversation. It's just a matter of awareness. In so much of our life, our manners aren't bad because we're mean or ornery. They're just bad because we're not necessarily aware of what's going on around us, or aware of how something's hitting a person, or aware of how somebody's feeling in this moment, or just even sometimes we use the term reading the room. But rudeness a lot of times happens when we don't pay attention. It's not a matter of being difficult, it's a matter of being clued out. And I think Mary was a very clued-in person here. She was very aware of who she was. Hey, I'm undeserving. She was very aware of what she'd experienced. She had been visited by heaven. She was very aware of who Jesus was. He was the Messiah. She was very aware of her place in the story. She was to be the mother to her maker. Figure that one out. She was aware of God's role and God's providence. She was aware of those who were helping her, Joseph, Elizabeth, even possibly an innkeeper who maybe out of kindness offered them a stable. We don't know. She was aware of the magnificence of the moment. She was aware of the significance of the shepherds, not just that they were there, but who they were that came. And this verse fits right here where she looks at these shepherds and go, oh, this is who God invited to his birth, the lowest. Well, hey, you belong right here with me. But that awareness is such an important thing. And as I mentioned, she's recounting this story decades later, but her recollection of detail, I think, is incredibly impressive because she was taking that all in. And so this is just a simple idea. And I realize not the main point of the story or whatever. But I see how Mary thinks, and she's like totally clued into what's going on. And I'm just making an assumption or suggestion that as she thinks that way, that allows her to be way different with other people, to be kinder, to be gentler, to show better manners. One final idea here this morning. She showed an affability with others. When the angel shows up, there's nothing but kindness shown to the angel. Fear, I guess you could add. But with Elizabeth, we said maybe Elizabeth, she went to Elizabeth to find a safe space. It's also possible, I think, that she went, when she found Elizabeth was pregnant, she was like, man, I better go help her. We don't really know. But when, any stranger who walked into her story was welcome. Shepherds show up at a stable, hey, come on in. Later we see her go to the temple to go through the dedication rites there. And Anna shows up, and Simeon shows up, and every person who comes into the story is, here, let me share this baby with you. And even when the wise men show up a little bit later on, here, let me share this. And there's an openness to people. Every stranger who walks into her story is welcome and received from as near as we can tell here. And we get the sense that she viewed everybody as equal to her and as important to her and as meaningful. And you know what? This is my baby, but this is your baby too. And we just see this generous spirit that they show to other people. You're shepherds, you're the lowest of society. Hey, come on in, you're fine. Oh, you're old, Anna and Simeon. Oh, I want you to be part of the story. You're foreigners, wise men, come be. Everybody was included here. Why? I think because she didn't see herself as better. Maybe she recognized that she was privileged. She didn't have to fight with people. She could just see that they were part of God's story. She didn't have to fight for herself because she was willing to take what God gave her. And I think we need to be reminded of this, is sometimes we become rude when we don't appreciate it or we don't prioritize other people. And I think Mary, in all of this story could have been a whole lot about her. And it never really became about her. And even as you read her account here in Luke 1 and 2, it's not told to make Mary look good. It's just said, hey, here's what happened. So we don't really know. Let's be honest, okay? We don't really know if Mary had good manners. I'm just assuming so, because we can get an idea of how she thinks and how she thinks about others and how she thinks about the world that's around her. We see that she has an accurate view of herself. She's accepting of what is, I think appreciative even of what is. She's aware, she's affable. And all of those things are part of having good manners, because of the way that we think is going to show up in the way that we act out. Sometimes when we talk about somebody having good manners, we use this phrase, well, that person is really thoughtful. And I think that fits here. Really thoughtful. And we typically mean that person is really thoughtful of thinking of other people and thinking of what they're going through or thinking through the situation here. But I think good manners is also a matter of being thoughtful in the fact that we just need to think correctly. Okay, I'm not all that. I don't have to get all worked up if somebody doesn't treat me the right way because I'm not that big a deal. And I can accept what happens in life. I don't have to fight and manipulate and try to get my way by being rude and overpower whatever. I don't have to go there. I can accept other people and bring them into the story. I can be aware of what's going on there. And I think it's really thoughtfulness. Or sometimes we use this phrase too, you need to mind your manners. We usually mean by that what? Like practice good manners. But what if we actually meant it, what it said? Mind, think correctly so that your manners will be what they should be. And so as we look at this story, another story of Mary, not another story of Mary, another story of Christmas here, the story of Mary, we don't really get a big picture on manners of what she did, but we do get a little picture of what was going on in her mind. Or maybe you could say what was going on in her heart. And my guess is what was going on there totally affected what was going on here. And it's the same for us, right? As we think, so we do. You want good manners? Think good manners. Let's pray. So, Jesus, we come again, grateful just for the fact that you come for us. But we're grateful for the fact that you involve people in your story. And Mary was such a key player in the story. As we look at her story here this morning, we just get a little glimpse of the person that she was, of the humility that she lived with the submission that she lived with to your plan, with this awareness that she lived with what was going on around her, with the way that she behaved and seemed to treat other people and respond to other people around her. And we're challenged to be like that. But we don't just see it in Mary, Jesus, we see it in you. You were the one who made yourself nothing and came to be one of us. You were the one who accepted a cross for us so that we wouldn't have to die for our own sins. You were the one who reached out to us, who came to seek and save sinners who were lost. And so, Jesus, we praise you this morning. Our heads are bowed, our eyes are closed. If you come this morning and you don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, maybe this is all foreign to you. Jesus came as a baby, died on a cross as a man, not because he deserved death, but because we did. So he took our place and died for our sins. And he wants to give you forgiveness if you'll ask him and invite him into your life, and you can do that where you sit this morning. If you ever have questions about that, I would love to talk to you too, anybody. Maybe you've trusted Jesus Christ. Maybe Christmas has meaning to you because Jesus came not only into the world, but he came into your own heart. But let me ask you this question. What is there from Mary's story here this morning that you need to think about? And as you think about it, maybe it's how you need to live it out too. What decision will you make this morning? What commitment will you make? And so, Jesus, as we go from here today, I pray that we would not walk out the doors and forget about this story, but that we would see throughout our week this week opportunities to be Mary, to humble ourselves, to step back and not have to fight for our rights or our rightness or whatever it is, to accept what is, to be warm towards people, to be aware of the world that we live in and how we can reach out to others. I pray that we be changed. We ask this all in your name, Jesus. Amen. Would you stand with me this morning? We've got a week till Christmas, 8 days. We'll be back next week, Sunday night, 7 o'clock. Bring somebody with you. We're going to have a great service here, candlelight service. If you brought cookies, please be sure to, grab some good ones out there. Thanks for participating in that. And hopefully I'll see you next Sunday night, but I want to wish everybody a great Christmas season too. God bless you. You're dismissed.